Joan bought a telescope. That's how it all started. Not for astronomy, mind you. No, Joan had developed a sudden interest in watching the stars, a phrase she whispered like it was sacred scripture, clutching her latest subscription to Sky and Space Monthly like she'd just discovered her life's calling after 38 years of thoroughly not caring about the night sky. The telescope arrived on a Thursday. She signed for it like she was welcoming an old friend, dragged the box upstairs, and posted a story on Instagram with the caption, "Finally following my passions." Passion. Joan's last documented passion was a heated argument with our toaster. And she lost. To her credit, the telescope was impressive. Sleek, modern, looked like something NASA would keep on a leash. She set it up on the back deck and spent long evenings squinting through it while wearing a knit beanie. The kind people wear when they want you to know they read obscure poetry and have opinions on oat milk. "Come see Jupiter," she'd call to me with a voice soaked in condescension, like I was an underprivileged youth she was mentoring through a nonprofit she made up on the spot. I'd shuffle out, sip my lukewarm root beer, and peer through the lens. And every time, without fail, I saw nothing but darkness and a vague reflection of my own eye. "Incredible," I'd say. "It's like I'm really not seeing anything." Joan would sigh, tuck a strand of hair behind her ear like she was in a French indie film, and whisper something about Saturn's rings before retreating back to her observation log, which appeared to be a moleskine filled with what I can only describe as romantic haikus to constellations that definitely didn't exist. This went on for 3 weeks. At first, I thought she was going through something harmless, an early midlife crisis with a celestial twist. I figured it was better than interpretive dance or taxidermy. But then things got specific. Like, weirdly specific. She began talking about a particular star she'd bonded with. She called it Epsilon Eridani. Said it had a soulful flicker. I asked if she was sure it wasn't just a reflection from our neighbor's bug zapper, but she waved me off, deeply insulted. "Epsi has a rhythm," she said, "and he doesn't judge me." And that, dear reader, is when I began to suspect that Epsilon Eridani had a LinkedIn profile. Now, I wasn't going to accuse my wife of infidelity with a celestial body. I'm not completely unhinged. But I did find it strange that she started locking the bedroom door. Not at night. No, that would have been refreshingly old school. But during the day, when she was in there with the telescope. She claimed she was meditating with the universe. I claimed she was making it very difficult to find my lucky socks. One afternoon, in a moment of rare domestic negotiation, Joan allowed me to look through the telescope unsupervised. She handed it off like it was the Hope Diamond and gave me a 90-second window before she needed it back for orbital tracking. So I took my 90 seconds. And guess what I saw? A roof. More specifically, Barry's roof. Barry, our neighbor, who lives exactly one house over and apparently has a second-floor office with very poor blinds and an even worse habit of leaving his shirt half-buttoned while pacing in front of his desk, deep in dramatic phone calls. Epsilon Eridani, it seemed, had a mortgage and a gym membership. I didn't say anything right away. I needed confirmation. Not because I was in denial. No, I was well past denial. I'd done my grieving back when she replaced our wedding photo with a poster of Neil deGrasse Tyson. But I wanted to be sure. I wanted proof. And I wanted it with style. So I borrowed a telescope of my own. From the library. That's right. Your tax dollars at work. For the next few evenings, I set up across the deck from Joan, pretending to join her newfound interest. We stood out there like rival astronomers from feuding departments. Hers, the College of Cosmic Love. Mine, the Institute of Very Suspicious Activity. It was during these silent sky watching sessions that I began to see the pattern. Barry would arrive home at precisely 6:15 each evening. Joan would rush upstairs with the enthusiasm of a woman running toward destiny. And the telescope would swivel, not upward, but at a 34-degree downward tilt. Right at Barry's house. I considered confronting Barry directly. But what would I say? "Excuse me, are you aware my wife is having a torrid affair with your living room?" Instead, I got creative. I printed out a chart. One of those glossy ones you see in museums, a star map. But instead of constellations, I plotted Barry's daily movements as observed through Joan's telescope, complete with little illustrations. Here's Barry microwaving something. Here's Barry playing air guitar with a golf club. Here's Barry dramatically removing his tie like he's in a cologne commercial. I taped it to the inside of Joan's closet. Then I waited. It took her 3 days to find it. When she did, I was in the kitchen, preparing what I assumed would be my last sandwich as a married man. She walked in, holding the chart like a scroll of ancient betrayal. "Really, Peter?" she asked. "Careful," I said. "You're creasing the segment labeled 'Barry checks his reflection in the toaster.'" That one took real effort. She stood there for a long moment. Then she sat down, and, unexpectedly, she laughed. A real, actual laugh. The kind she hadn't let out in months. I think even she realized how ridiculous it all was. But it didn't make it hurt any less. So there we were. One of us emotionally betrayed. One of us awkwardly amused. And both of us aware that the jig, as they say, was up. That was how I found out. No lipstick on collars. No secret texts. Just a $1,300 telescope and a neighbor who apparently makes exceptional eye contact with the Milky Way. And this, as they say, was only the beginning. Joan joined an astronomy club. This, apparently, was the next logical step after becoming emotionally entangled with our neighbor's vinyl siding via high-powered optics. She came home one evening with a canvas tote bag emblazoned with Central Indiana Stargazers, in Helvetica, and the kind of pride usually reserved for Nobel Prize winners and people who knit their own socks. "It's a community," she said, carefully removing a lanyard from the tote like it was a sacred talisman. "People who understand the cosmos. People who listen." I resisted the urge to point out that last night she had screamed at the microwave for not respecting her defrost preferences, but I was still busy processing her PowerPoint-worthy infatuation with Barry's roof tiles. Instead, I nodded. "Nice lanyard." Joan didn't hear me. She was too busy flipping through a welcome packet that included a badge, a schedule of upcoming meetups, and, unfortunately, a members directory. I waited until she was in the shower to take a peek at it. There it was, page 3. Barry Whitaker, member since January. Apparently the stars had aligned months before I caught wind of it. Next to his name was a quote in italics. "Eyes on the sky, heart on the earth." I didn't know quotes could give me a headache, but that one did. Naturally, Joan insisted I come to one of the meetings. Said it would be good for me. Good for me. In this context, meaning, it would look less suspicious if my husband came along to this thing I'm emotionally cheating through. So I went. I wore my best confused face and my least wrinkled shirt. The event took place in the community center multipurpose room, a space that smelled like expired coffee and old crayons, and had acoustics optimized for mild disappointment. I entered behind Joan, who beamed like she was bringing a celebrity to meet her extended family. Except the celebrity was me, and the family was a collection of people who spent their free time arguing over telescope mounts and treating planetary alignment like it affected their cholesterol. Barry was already there, of course. Center stage, literally. He was giving a presentation titled "The Personality of Planets," a fun approach to celestial relationships. It was the kind of thing that makes you question your life decisions in real time. Joan clapped after every slide. Every single slide. At one point, Barry described Mars as the aggressive flirt of the solar system and gave it a wink. The room laughed. Joan laughed louder. I scratched my eyebrow with my middle finger, which didn't go unnoticed. Joan jabbed me in the ribs and whispered, "Be nice." The highlight of the evening came when the group divided into small clusters for what they called stargazing partners, a term that would have been adorable if it didn't smell like a thinly veiled matchmaking service. Joan conveniently ended up in Barry's group. I, however, was placed with an 82-year-old man named Clarence who claimed to have once seen Neptune wink at him. Clarence smelled faintly of onions and told me Pluto was a victim of political correctness. After the meeting, we all stood around eating sugar cookies shaped like moons. Barry sauntered up and, without so much as a glance in my direction, said to Joan, "Great energy tonight. You really lit up the room." She giggled. Not laughed, giggled. I hadn't heard that sound since the time she fell asleep watching The Bachelor with wine and drooled into a cheese puff. On the drive home, she wouldn't stop smiling. "You have to admit," she said, "Barry's really insightful." "Yes," I replied. "He's the Socrates of Jupiter metaphors." Joan missed the sarcasm entirely. Exactly. For the next few weeks, our house became a launchpad for club events. Joan hosted moon phase mixers, where people brought snacks shaped like planets and wore glow-in-the-dark name tags. Barry was a frequent guest. He always brought his laptop and a slideshow. No one asked him to. He just believed the world was starving for his thoughts on asteroid belts. One Saturday, I walked into the kitchen to find Joan and Barry hunched over her laptop. She quickly closed the screen and said, "We're working on the Star Map app. It's for the club." I nodded. "Ah, yes. The app. Of course. That's what the kids are calling it now." Barry chuckled and patted me on the shoulder. "You're funny, Pete. I like that." "Please don't," I said. I'm not sure what broke me first, the forced familiarity, the obvious chemistry, or the fact that Joan started referring to Barry as her cosmic partner, like she was auditioning for a role in a science fiction soap opera. It wasn't rage. I didn't flip any tables or shout anything dramatic. No, I did something far worse. I became polite. Overbearingly polite. That passive-aggressive, Midwest brand kind of polite that says, "Sure thing, pal," with a smile that could curdle milk. "Barry, would you like some more coffee? It's dark roast. Like the void of space. You'd love it." "Oh, Joan, don't let me interrupt. You two keep syncing constellations, or whatever it is you do." When Barry brought over a USB drive labeled Stellar Sync, I borrowed it while he was in the bathroom and plugged it into my own laptop. Inside were presentation files, a few spreadsheets, and surprise, a folder of photos. Not of stars. Of Joan. Laughing, lounging, leaning against a telescope like she was auditioning for a catalog titled Intro to Infidelity. One photo caught my eye. Joan holding up a note that said, "My favorite view on Earth." She was sitting in Barry's den. I recognized the bookshelf. I had helped him carry it in during a neighborhood cleanup day. The irony wasn't lost on me. That evening, I printed out the photo and taped it to our fridge under a magnet shaped like the moon. I went to bed early. Joan didn't bring it up for 2 days. When she did, she said, "What's that supposed to mean?" I replied, "It's your best angle." Joan left the room. Barry stopped coming over after that, but not because of shame. He had a big speaking opportunity at a nearby planetarium and needed space, which I found both predictable and hilarious. Joan said I was being cold. I said she was mistaking passive aggression for Arctic charm. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was how I discovered that my wife's new relationship had the subtlety of a fire drill and the self-awareness of a reality TV audition tape. The best part? She still hadn't technically confessed. Not once. Not directly. But I had the photos, the stargazing logs, and the witness statements from every planet-themed cookie event in a 5-mile radius. And I wasn't done yet. Joan's club newsletter had a typo. It read, "Don't miss our next meteor shower, hosted by Barry Whitaker and his passion." It was supposed to say presentation. A small detail, maybe. But I printed it out, framed it, and hung it in the bathroom directly across from the toilet so it could be appreciated in moments of quiet reflection. That newsletter set the tone for the week. Joan was quieter than usual. Not because of guilt, no, but because she discovered the club had a Discord server and was spending every waking hour arguing with a guy named Stellar Sam 42 about telescope filters. I was learning that betrayal came in many forms, and one of them involved my wife calling someone bro at 2 a.m. So I made a plan. You see, Joan had the telescope, the tote bag, and the tote bag friends. But what she didn't know was that the club had one fundamental flaw. They accepted public submissions for their monthly newsletter. That's right. Any member could send in an essay, a poem, a technical review, or, as I intended, an interview. I created a persona. Douglas Rigby, aspiring astronomer, former bowling league champion, full of questions, light on shame. Then I reached out to Barry. "Hi Barry," my email began. "Big fan of your planetary presentations. I'm working on a Meet the Stargazer piece for the next issue. Can I send over some questions? Just trying to showcase the more human side of our members." Barry replied 14 minutes later. "Absolutely. Happy to be part of it. Love that idea. Let's give Em a glimpse beyond the telescope." He added a smiley face. I included 10 questions. Harmless ones. How did you get into astronomy? Favorite planet? Why do you think so many people connect with the stars? Then, number 9. Has your passion for the stars ever crossed into your personal life in surprising ways? His answer? Actually, yes. Funny story. I formed a really strong bond with another club member, one I didn't expect. We shared more than just charts and data. I think sometimes people come into your orbit at the right time, you know? The universe knows what it's doing. The newsletter editor accepted it without edits. And just like that, Barry published his own confession. We got the issue 2 days later. Joan was sitting at the kitchen table, circling items in a gardening catalog like our backyard wasn't already where plants went to die, when she saw it. She stared at the page for a long time. Then she flipped to the front. Then back again. Then she said, "Who's Douglas Rigby?" I replied, "Probably someone with too much free time and a strong Wi-Fi signal." She didn't say anything. That night, Joan hosted another stargazing circle, which, despite sounding like a pagan ritual, was mostly 6 people sitting in lawn chairs pretending to enjoy each other's company. Barry wasn't there. He had prior commitments, which I assumed was code for got caught being poetic on the record. I watched from the kitchen, sipping a drink that wasn't strong enough for the evening I was having. I noticed that people weren't talking to Joan as much. They nodded, sure, but they also squinted. There was whispering. One woman handed Joan a cookie, then immediately looked away like she was participating in a handoff during a Cold War spy exchange. The universe was shifting. 2 days later, the club's leadership, an elderly woman named Darlene and a man who wore cargo shorts year-round, sent out an announcement that members should refrain from discussing interpersonal relationships in official club media, as it detracts from our shared astronomical mission. Joan read the message twice, then closed her laptop without finishing her usual quinoa salad. You know it's serious when Joan doesn't finish a quinoa salad. She didn't talk to me for the rest of the night, but I noticed her leave the house shortly before 9 p.m. I checked the driveway. Barry's car wasn't there. It didn't matter. I had what I needed. The stars had spoken, and for once, I was the one with the telescope. Then something surprising happened. Joan invited me to breakfast. Not the kind where we sit in silence and pretend the coffee maker isn't louder than our communication. No, this was a full setup. Tablecloth, freshly cut fruit. She even put her phone in another room, which was the 21st century equivalent of a standing ovation. I sat down. She smiled. "So," she began, "how are you feeling these days?" Like a man whose wife developed a crush on Orion's belt and then wandered emotionally into the arms of a PowerPoint enthusiast. She didn't flinch. "Do you think," she asked, "we're growing apart?" "Joan," I said, "you formed an entire personality around a telescope and spent 6 weeks crafting a relationship with a man who owns a star-themed necktie. So yes, I'd say there's been some drift." She nodded. "But you've been watching, not reacting." "What?" I thought about that. "Because reacting would have given it more credit than it deserved," I said. "You wanted adventure. Fine. But sneaking it in through community outreach and moon pies is just lazy. At least be original." Joan stared at her mug. "I didn't expect to get caught. I didn't expect you to try this hard not to admit it." We sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, "What happens now?" That was the question. The one she didn't ask when she taped glow-in-the-dark stars to our bedroom ceiling, or when she added Space Daddy to Barry's contact name. Yes, I saw that. No, I didn't bring it up. It just felt like kicking a folding chair. It would make noise, but nothing would change. So I answered her honestly. Now, we stopped pretending that this was about the stars. It wasn't. It was about attention, about being seen. And Barry gave you that. Not because he's special, but because he was new. Joan blinked. That's harsh. It's accurate. She nodded again, slowly, like she finally heard the thing I'd been quietly saying for weeks. Then she stood up and left the room. That was the last time we had a real conversation in the same room. No shouting, no melodrama. Just two people sitting at a breakfast table, realizing they'd both spent the last few months orbiting something that no longer had gravity. And that, as far as I was concerned, was her answer. I never liked group activities. Not in school, not at work, not even in those awkward neighborhood BBQs where people pretend potato salad is a personality. But given recent events, my wife's seasonal obsession with community astronomy and Barry's slow-motion pirouette into her emotional inbox, I figured, why not try it her way? So I joined the club. Technically, I rejoined it. You see, I had signed up months earlier under my alias, Douglas Rigby, the man with no filter and an undying appreciation for low-effort Photoshop graphics. But now, I registered as Peter, husband of Joan, and apparently the first person in club history to not include a fun fact on his welcome bio. Darlene, the club's de facto matriarch and an 83-year-old woman who wore socks with Roman numerals on them for authenticity, was delighted. It's so important to see couples participating together, she said, tapping a clipboard like it was a court order. We need more masculine energy around here. Everyone else is either Barry or allergic to chairs. Joan didn't speak to me for the first 20 minutes of our next meeting. She arrived late, which she never did, and took a seat on the far side of the room next to a guy named Kevin who claimed to have once decoded satellite interference using a whiteboard and a set of expired coupons. Barry was absent again. His new project, a web series called Planet Talk with Barry, had kept him very busy with editing, according to his latest community post that no one liked. Darlene asked me to introduce myself to the group. I stood up, cleared my throat, and said, "Hi, I'm Peter. I'm Joan's husband. My hobbies include lawn care, mild skepticism, and trying not to fall asleep during amateur lectures about Neptune's temperature." 3 people chuckled. Joan did not. I wasn't there to impress her. I was there to remind her, and everyone else, that while she had built her cosmic escape plan on quirky snacks and overblown metaphors, I still existed. I was in her group, in her space, on the event calendar. And I had excellent posture. 2 weeks later, I volunteered to host the monthly meetup. Joan didn't protest. She just blinked at me with the enthusiasm of someone watching a stranger floss. I prepared the backyard like it was a tactical mission. Chairs evenly spaced. No music, no candles, no fake charm. Just me, a TV tray, and a flip chart I borrowed from my office. The topic I selected was the myth of romanticized star maps, how nostalgia ruins celestial objectivity. Everyone hated it, which was perfect. People came expecting a presentation full of twinkly admiration. Instead, I gave a dry, data-driven comparison of ancient sky lore versus modern optical readings, complete with hand-drawn charts and a laser pointer I wielded like I was guiding aircraft. Joan sat through the whole thing with her arms crossed, surrounded by 3 newer members who looked like they regretted ever Googling astronomy club near me. After my presentation, I opened the floor for discussion. No one had any questions, except Clarence. He asked if I believed Pluto had feelings. I said no. The room fell silent again. Joan lingered afterward, standing near the porch light like she was trying to merge with the siding. I walked over. "Bold choice of topic," she said flatly. "I like to keep it grounded," I replied. "You know, unlike certain interpretive orbital romances." "Still going with that, huh?" "Going with what?" "I gave a presentation. You're the one who turned a telescope into a mood ring." She didn't laugh. That was fine. I hadn't expected her to. But then she asked the one question I didn't expect. "Why are you really doing this?" That stopped me for a second. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many. I wanted to say it was because of Barry's pretentious grin, or the smug way she logged her observations like she was rewriting her life with a gel pen. Or maybe it was the note she left on the fridge 2 days earlier that said, "Please remember to wash your dishes. The stars don't align for clutter." But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, "Because for the first time in 6 years, you actually looked excited. And it wasn't about me. It wasn't even about you. It was about being admired for something you barely understood by someone who didn't know you well enough to be disappointed." She looked away. That landed. I continued. "You wanted to be someone new. And Barry was just the first person willing to pretend along with you." Silence again. I was getting good at those. She left shortly after. Didn't say goodbye. Just picked up her tote bag, now with a new patch that read "Exploration Never Ends," and walked down the steps like it was a scene change in a community theater production no one clapped for. The next week, she stopped going to meetings. Barry's web series launched. I watched part of one episode. He opened with, "Hey Star Souls," and I closed the browser. Joan started spending more time out of the house. Not suspiciously, just in a quiet, unceremonious way, like she was still looking for something to attach her identity to. I didn't ask where she went. Not out of bitterness. I just figured that whatever she was chasing didn't have anything to do with telescopes anymore. And me? I stayed in the club. I know. Why stay in something born from pettiness and passive-aggressive scheming? Because it turned out, I actually liked some of the members. I liked hearing Clarence rant about dark matter conspiracies. I liked watching Kevin try to sell his self-published moon calendar. I liked sitting in the back, arms folded, offering exactly zero enthusiasm while someone explained the Andromeda merger like it was breaking news. And maybe I liked that I didn't have to be anyone's prop anymore. Not the supportive husband of the month. Not the background character in someone's reinvention. Just Peter. The guy with the pointer laser and the aggressive bar graphs. I hadn't forgiven Joan. Not yet. Probably not ever. But I had gotten to the point where I could be in the same backyard as the mess she left behind and not feel like I had to mop it up. That was a start. Joan asked me if we could talk. That's how it started. 3 words, said casually, like she was asking for the remote or a different brand of toothpaste. It was a Tuesday, rainy, which would have been poetic if I had any interest in matching my emotional decline to the weather. I didn't. I just knew it meant I'd have to mow the lawn again in 2 days, and Joan would pretend to notice from the porch without actually looking up from her phone. She sat across from me at the dining table like this was a job interview she forgot she scheduled. She had her hands clasped in front of her, her nails freshly painted, silver, of course. A nod to the moon, she once said. Because nothing says self-awareness like coordinating your cuticle aesthetic with failed ambitions. I've been thinking, she said. This was already going downhill. You've been quiet lately, she added. Yes, I replied. I'm conserving energy in case of power outages. She blinked. No laugh. We'd long since bypassed the humor phase of marital decline. She tried again. Do you think we've changed? No, I said. I think the branding just finally wore off. She stared at me for a second like I'd spoken a different language. Then she stood up and left the room, only to return with a stack of papers. I assumed she'd joined another club, maybe something involving topography or handwriting analysis. But no, this was something worse. She'd made a list. Several lists, actually, organized in neat columns, bullet-pointed, with headers like discussion points and household transition scenarios. She even used color coding. Blue for practical, yellow for emotional, green for things requiring mutual compromise. I hadn't seen this level of uninvited project management since a company retreat forced us into a trust fall exercise on carpeted stairs. Joan began reading. I think, based on recent months, it's clear that we're not aligned in goals, personal development paths, or emotional compatibility. That sentence should come with footnotes, I said. I wanted to suggest we have a structured dialogue about where we go from here. Not a fight, not a breakdown, just clarity. It was almost impressive. The woman who once declared Mercury in retrograde as a valid excuse for skipping her cousin's wedding was now negotiating the disassembly of our lives with PowerPoint energy and the emotional range of a library assistant. I said nothing, so she continued. This isn't just about what happened with Barry. Oh, good. We were finally saying his name like he was a real person and not the poorly concealed mascot of a midlife crisis. I think I needed something to wake me up, she said. I didn't expect it to happen like that, but it did. And I'm sorry, but it's not just about him. She paused, as if expecting me to validate that last part. I didn't. I needed to feel like I was choosing something again. You could have chosen literally anything else, I said. A hobby, a job, a new laundry detergent. But you went with an adult man who has opinions about Saturn's tone. She sighed. I'm trying to be honest here. No, you're trying to control the narrative, I said. There's a difference. Honesty is messy. What you're doing is a press release with charts. We sat there for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't feel dramatic, just awkward. Like someone paused the wrong part of a video. She reached for one of the sheets. I've outlined a few options for how we could separate things. I kept it fair. Did you include the telescope? I asked. She didn't look up. You can have it if you want. I don't, I said. It's seen enough. Joan smiled at that. A small one. Not happy, not mocking. Just human. I almost forgot what that looked like on her. We went through the papers. Some of them were practical. Who would take the car, what to do about the joint checking account, how to handle explaining things to the 3 people who still thought we were a functional couple. Others were unnecessarily detailed. She had included a 6-week timeline for emotional decompression, like we were employees offboarding from a particularly stressful contract. You made this very clean, I said. I didn't want to drag it out. Kind of late for that. She didn't argue. That was progress. Eventually, she asked the real question. So, do we agree? I didn't answer right away. I picked up one of the papers. It had boxes, actual check boxes, next to phrases like divide furniture respectfully and determine final communication style. I looked at her. This is the least romantic breakup I've ever seen. She looked down. I didn't think you'd want drama. I don't. But maybe a little self-awareness would have been nice. She nodded. That's fair. We agreed on the basics. She'd move in with her sister temporarily. I'd stay in the house. The club would be told we were taking time for ourselves. Joan's idea, naturally. Always a spin. Even now. The next day, she packed up a few things. Not dramatically. Just clothes, some books, and a plant she once claimed was symbolic of our resilience. It had been dead for weeks. She took it anyway. Before she left, she turned to me at the door. "You'll be okay." "You don't get to say that," I said. "Not anymore." She nodded. That was it. She left. No hug. No handshake. No retro-themed goodbye. That night, I sat on the couch in total silence. Not emotional silence. Just literal silence. I realized I hadn't been alone in a room that quiet in over a decade. I looked over at the telescope, now leaning awkwardly in the corner like an out-of-date floor lamp. I picked it up and carried it out to the garage. I didn't throw it away. I wasn't that sentimental or that dramatic. I just didn't need it inside the house anymore. It had already seen too much, and honestly, its lens was probably as tired as I was. The first thing I noticed after Joan left was how quiet the laundry got. That might sound strange, but when you live with someone for years, even the boring stuff has background noise. Joan, for instance, had a specific way of folding shirts that involved loud sighs, 2 unnecessary flicks of the wrist, and the occasional muttered complaint about the elastic tyranny of modern waistbands. I never said anything. I just learned to recognize the rhythm. Without it, the room sounded like I'd turned off a podcast mid-sentence and forgot to hit play again. It wasn't sadness. Not really. It was more like I was trying to remember what my own routine used to sound like before it became a duet of mild irritation and mismatched calendars. Joan texted 3 days after she left. Just a thumbs-up emoji in response to a bill I'd paid. Which, honestly, was probably the most emotionally efficient communication we'd had in years. I didn't reply. Later that week, I got an email from the astronomy club. Darlene was retiring from her post as club coordinator. Apparently, after recent dramas, she decided it was time to focus on her own research, which from what I could tell mostly involved theories about Venus being misrepresented in pop culture. They asked if I consider taking on a leadership role. Apparently, my data-driven perspective brought a refreshing balance to our programming. Translation: I bored everyone enough to neutralize the chaos. I said yes, not because I cared about the structure of the club, but because I figured someone had to make sure no one slipped Barry another microphone. He'd returned, of course, publicly unscathed, privately less shiny. People greeted him with that overly polite indifference usually reserved for people who steal pens and don't return Tupperware. He still wore that smirk like it had been surgically attached. He never mentioned Joan. Neither did I. A week later, Joan emailed me. No emojis this time. Just plain, functional words. "Peter, I left my file boxes in the coat closet. Can I swing by Friday to grab them? I'll be quick. Let me know if that works. Joan, no, hope you're doing okay. No apology recap. Just a schedule request, typed like she was managing an office supply transfer. I replied with a single sentence. Sure. I'll be home after 6. Friday came. She showed up at 6:08, because of course she did. Still punctual enough to be efficient. Still slightly off enough to remind me that she wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. She walked in wearing a sweater I didn't recognize, holding a tote bag I did. The infamous astronomy bag. It had faded a little, like even the stars had stopped rooting for her. "Hey," she said, like we were co-workers who ran into each other by the printer. "Boxes are in the closet," I said. She nodded, walked past me, didn't stop to look around, didn't ask how I'd been, which was fine. I had no interest in small talk with someone who once called Saturn misunderstood, but couldn't recognize the look on her own husband's face. She grabbed 2 file boxes, both labeled in her handwriting. Documents, Joan, keep, and miscellaneous, sentimental, Joan, private. That second one caught my eye. Private? In a house we used to share? She saw me glance. "It's mostly cards and old notes. Some stuff from college," she said. I didn't ask if there was a third box for things she lied about. That would have made it weird, and we were aiming for quick and polite. She stood at the door with the boxes in her arms, hesitating just enough for me to know she wasn't finished yet. "I know you don't want a conversation," she said, "but can I say something?" "You're already saying it," I replied. She blinked. That slowed her down. "I messed it up," she said. "I handled it poorly." "I know that." "That's generous," I said. "Most people would have gone with catastrophically." She gave me a weak smile. "Fair." There was a pause, like she was waiting for me to fill it. I didn't. I wanted something that felt like mine, she said. The club, the telescope, even Barry, stupid as that sounds now. I wanted a version of me that wasn't filtered through our marriage. And you got her, I said. So what now? She looked down. Turns out that version doesn't know how to do her taxes or fix a garbage disposal. Tragic, I said. She sounds exhausting. Joan shifted the boxes in her arms. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to acknowledge it. That I hurt you. That I did it badly. I'm sorry. It was the first time she said it. Out loud. Directly. I nodded. You're late. She frowned. What? You should have said that months ago? But I guess that's always been your timing. She let out a breath and looked toward the door. Take care of yourself, Peter. You too, I said. And if Barry ever brings a laser pointer to another club meeting, I'm banning props. That got a real laugh. Just one. Brief, unguarded. Then she left. I didn't watch her go. That felt too dramatic. Later that night, I opened the closet again. A small envelope had slid behind where the boxes had been. I picked it up. No label. No note. Inside was a printout of one of my old club presentations, the one about mythology and data. I had joked during it that romanticizing stars is how people end up disappointed by space and relationships. Joan had circled that line, underlined it, wrote in the margin, yeah, I get it now. I tossed it in the recycling. Not out of spite. It just didn't serve a purpose anymore. Things settled after that. She stopped reaching out. The club moved on. Barry eventually stepped down from event planning to focus on individual growth. His replacement brought cookies and talked about infrared technology. No one missed Barry. I started biking again. Nothing dramatic. Just early mornings before the town got loud. It felt nice. Boring, reliable, slightly uphill. A good way to remember that motion doesn't always have to be dramatic to be progress. As for Joan, I don't know where she ended up. I assume somewhere functional. She always lands upright, like those phone cases that promise not to shatter. Sometimes people ask me if I'd ever get married again. I say I'm not against it. But next time, I'm skipping the stargazing metaphors. I'd rather just sit next to someone who doesn't need a telescope to feel like they're part of something bigger. That's it. That's the whole thing. End of the story. Or, as Joan would say, end of transmission. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel